The fallout from the latest release of the Epstein documents has stretched far and wide. In the UK, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, did not know Jeffrey Epstein, but he's now facing calls to step down because of him. Starmer had to apologize to Epstein's survivors after the latest release that came out showed more connections between his pick for ambassador to Washington, that's Peter Mandelson, and Jeffrey Epstein. Starmer has now since been facing an angry revolt from his own party after he said that he did know about the relationship that Mandelson and Epstein had, yet still assigned Mandelson to the critical post here in Washington anyway. The fallout does not stop there, though. It's also reaching into Norway, where the crown princess there is facing fresh scrutiny over her ties and her emails to Epstein, and also in Poland, where the prime minister says that they are looking into ties between Jeffrey Epstein and Russian intelligence services. One world leader who says he is not concerned about the fallout from the Epstein files is here in the United States.
I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else, really. Now that nothing came out about me, other than there was a conspiracy against me, literally, by Epstein and other people. But I think it's time now for the country to maybe get onto something else.
But what would you say to people who feel like they haven't gotten justice, Mr. President?
Something that people care about. Yeah, what did you say? Go ahead.
What would you say to the survivors who feel like they haven't gotten justice?
You are the worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. You know, she's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile
Well,
on
I'm
your
asking
face.
you about survivors of Jeffrey Epstein,
You know why you're
Mr.
not
President?
smiling? Because you know you're not telling the truth. And you're a very dishonest organization, and they should be ashamed of you.
These are survivors of a sexual abuser. After that exchange happened in the Oval Office on Tuesday, the Vice President J.D. Vance offered this advice when asking questions about survivors of sexual assault.
I mean, like, there was a moment in the Oval Office, I wasn't even in there, but, you know, I was in the West Wing, and somebody sent me where he was talking to Caitlin Collins, who's the CNN anchor. And I have, like, a decent relationship with Caitlin Collins, which is unusual given that she's from CNN. But the president, she's asking a question. The president says, "Why don't you ever smile?"
Yeah.
And it's actually, like, so perceptive. Even if you're asking a tough question, even if you take your job very seriously, like, why does it always have to be so antagonistic?
Well, I laughed because I saw online everybody was calling him sexist for saying that. And I literally said the same thing about Caitlin Collins a year ago on my show. She never smiles. Every once in a while, you have to smile. Roger Ailes used to tell us that. Every once in a while, you get remember to smile, show the viewers that you have a heart.
Have some fun.
Yes, Megyn Kelly there was citing Roger Ailes, her former boss at Fox News, that she accused of sexual harassment. Again, the point of the question was what the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein are saying and the justice and the accountability that they want to see. It's nothing to smile about. And that group of survivors includes my next guest, Annie Farmer. And Annie, we have talked multiple times about this, about the disclosure of these files, about the fight that you and other survivors have had here, and about your sister. When you hear the president say he thinks the country wants to move on from the Epstein files, is that how you feel?
Well, first, let me say, Caitlin, thank you so much for having me back. And I know I don't just speak for myself when I say I really appreciate how persistent you were in questioning this administration about their failure with this release. I don't think it's something to smile about, and I thought you handled it very appropriately. I'm not surprised that Trump is ready to move on and that this DOJ is ready to move on, but we are certainly not, especially after we saw how poorly this last release of documents was handled.
And what is it that you do want? You know, people see this release. There was information that a lot of people felt should have been redacted that wasn't, or information that shouldn't have been, including that of victims and survivors that was. What was it that you've heard and that you saw?
I saw three primary issues with the way that where we are right now with this release. One was there were, for people that aren't looking through these documents themselves, I think it's hard to understand the quantity of documents that included personal identifying information about survivors. A list of names that was literally called the Epstein victim list that had something like 40 or 50 names, primarily of minor victims, completely unredacted except for one name, right? And then, as we know from the New York Times reporting, nude images of girls and young women that were released by our government, that's really them distributing child sexual abuse materials, right? Like, these are horrific things that happened during this release. And so those are, that is a huge issue. But then we also saw documents that were, victim statements completely blacked out, 3 pages of black ink, and then a small portion that wasn't, saying something like, this is why I'm so scared of these powerful men that harmed me. So obviously, people in positions of power continuing to be protected, the exact thing that the law was supposed to outline was not supposed to happen. And then third, we know that there is other pertinent information that has still not been released. Of course, people are continuing to sort through files. There is a lot, but for example, my sister Maria Farmer, in the first release, we saw part of her 1996 report to the FBI where she outlined the theft of photos that she had taken for her art, but she also described her own assault at Les Wexner's property, and she described my assault at Zora Ranch. And I don't believe there's any way that those were not documented as well, and we're still not seeing that. Is it because it included other names of powerful people? We don't know, but when they say we've released everything that's, pertinent to this investigation, we're not buying it.
Yeah, when people said they wanted to see the Epstein list, they weren't talking about a list of underage girls that he assaulted. They're talking about the powerful people in his orbit and accountability for that. And on the accountability front, I think some people look at what is happening in British Parliament, where they're screaming at Keir Starmer and his hands are kind of shaking as he's explaining his own ambassador's ties to Jeffrey Epstein, or trying to. And in Norway, where the crown princess is under scrutiny, does it feel to you like there's just not that same level of accountability in the United States?
Yeah, certainly from a government level, I think when we're looking overseas, we're wondering why is that happening elsewhere and we're not seeing it here. We are seeing, of course, people being forced to resign from positions of power, and people's relationships being, more closely examined, which I think is really important because, some of these people that were willing to look the other way about pedophilia are not people that I want making decisions about, my child's education or, about the healthcare of our country, right? So I think that there's different types of accountability, and we're seeing some of that happen, which I think is really important. But we also know that there were other crimes that were committed. And when we're hearing Todd Blanche say, there's not enough evidence for further prosecution to happen, I think the prosecutors I'm talking to that specifically work on these types of crimes are saying these files are full of investigative leads. But what we're not seeing is where was the investigation. And until we see what happened to follow up on those leads, I don't know how we are supposed to be satisfied and willing to move on when we know nothing was done.
Yeah, and there's a draft indictment with names blacked out. Andy Farmer, I'm always grateful when you're willing to come on and join us and speak from your experience. So thank you for being willing to do so again tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.